Okay, Shavua Tov. How befitting it is that we just naturally got up to the Piska in Marom on Tefilah on Talmidei Chachamim Marom Shalom Ba'olam. And since we are in the 3 weeks, this piece actually discusses Sinas Chinam. So, Baruch Hashem. You see, like the Shir Marom is like Daf Yomi. It's always pertinent to the time. Happened a bunch of times already. So let's get right into it. Talmidei Chachamim Marom Shalom Ba'olam. They increase peace in the world. Says Rabbi Yaakov Moshe, Sinas Chinam Shahaisa Bizman Ba'yesheni. We know that is what caused the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash, was Sinas Chinam. That Sinas Chinam that was found in the time of Bayis Sheni, Et hitgabrut giluyah shel haTorah shebaal peh. At the same time where there was an increase in the revelation of Torah shebaal peh. Remember, Rebbe started to put down the Mesader, the Mishnayos, with the Churban Bayis Sheni, which means though that the opinions of the Tanaim, etc., right, that really it was taught and came through in Bayis Sheni, so that the Bayis Sheni was a time where Torah shebaal peh really became formulated and revealed. And these two things are going on at the same time, like Sinas Chinam and the fleshing out of Torah shebaal peh, revelation of Torah shebaal peh. So it says that the Sinas Chinam that took place during this time of Bayis Sheni, when Torah shebaal peh was really being revealed, its fundamental root is in holiness. The shorish of Sinas Chinam is also b'kedusha, which should not really be so surprising to us, because everything has its roots in kedusha. Kizeu seder giluya shel Torah shebaal peh. But he explains why, what is the connection, where is it coming from in Kedusha? Because this is the order of revelation of Torah shebaal peh. Like Chazal say, the Gemara Kedushin, Esvohev basufa. So the Gemara darshans that to mean, Koidem nasim oivim zelezeh. In other words, Lashon of, well, actually he only brings the end over here. So Koidem nasim oivim zelezeh. They initially become like enemies to each other, and they don't move from there until they become, friends and loving each other. That's Romo is alluded to in the Lashon Vahev, Lashon of Ava, and the Sufa is only at the Seif, at the end. So at the beginning, Talmidei Chachamim argue it out, battle it out, and they mamish get upset at each other, and they become like enemies, right? Each one fiercely supporting his position and attacking the position of the other. But they don't leave there until they become oyhavim zelazeh. It's interesting, it doesn't say that they necessarily agree with each other when they get up to leave. They become oyhavim zelazeh. Says Rabbi Yaakov Moshe, Says Rabbi Yaakov Moshe, Misinas kodesh zu sheba betchila. From this holy hatred that comes at the start, hitpartza sinat achim sinat chinam, burst forth the sinas chinam, the hatred of brothers, shekach, because that's the way it is. Kol dovra tov yesh bo shmarim v'sigim. Every good thing also has sediments and pseilas. It has some bad parts to it. Or v'yesh shasigim mitgabrim, and there are times where the sigim, the sediment, overpowers, takes over. Umitoch shnei hamachanos shebirui halacha nizkokim lehem makshem etaytzim oynim umeshivim, and from within the two camps, that the clarifications of halacha need both of them, right? To get to the bottom of to the depth of the Torah, to the depth of the emes of the Torah, you need both of these camps, asking, answering, answering, replying from mitaych that, from within that, paretza Sinas Chinam, the Sinas Chinam bursts forth. So this is very, very chashuv, very, very chashuv. Right? Sinas Chinam has its roots in holiness. There's a similar idea which I think we saw together in Rabbi Yaakov Moshe about machlekes, that machlekes also has its roots in holiness, and particularly the koyach of machlekes that we have is rooted in our need to be misgaber on our Yetzer Hara, rigzu v'al techto. You know, you gotta be margiz the Yetzer Tov on the Yetzer Hara. So you have to learn how to fight the Yetzer Hara. So that koach of argumentation, of arguing and fighting and not agreeing, is rooted in that holiness of our own personal battle that we're supposed to have, but then it gets taken in the wrong direction. And same thing over here, this sinna. What's the sinna? Is this like it's because Talmidei Chachamim, right? The chosim of Torah is emes. The seal, the signature of Torah is of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? Chasam HaKadosh Baruch Hu is emes. The Torah is emes. So if somebody is saying something against that emes, I can't stand it. I can't stand it. It's like you're against God. You're falsifying the Torah. What could be worse than falsifying the Torah? You're an imposter. So there's this like hatred against this terrible position, which is trying to, inappropriately or pretends to be Torah, and it's a fake. This is what's going on. These two Talmidei Chacham are battling, sometimes 3, 4, right? They're battling it out. With Kiviyachol, there's like a sinna, but it's a holy sinna. Like, what are you talking about? But apparently, ultimately, I mean, Rabbi Yaakov Moshe doesn't say this, I'm saying this. They eventually come to love each other in that same sitting. They don't get up from there, or they don't leave there. In those days, in the early days, they learned standing, right? So they weren't sitting like us. That's only after Chosha Yardalai, weakness came down to the world, right? So, but they don't leave that argument and that back and forth, that rischa d'oraisa, until they become, lovers, close. It's an increased feeling of ava. I would venture to say that that's because after all the questioning and all the back and forth, and perhaps they didn't convince the other, and each one remains in their position. Perhaps. But at the end of the day, they realize, I see where he's coming from. I don't agree. I don't see like that. But he's not an imposter. Like, I could see the Torah can be understood in that way. There's an appreciation for the other. That, there's another perspective. That ability to see that there's another perspective allows the Ava to kick in and overtake the Sinna. Adarabba. Ultimately the Sinna brings to that Ava, because the Sinna was all about getting down to the truth. And then when you're able to see that there's another side of things, and no matter how much I asked, I couldn't stump him. At the end of the day, he's an answer for everything, and a legitimate answer for everything, like we see in the Gemara, right? That's what we see all the time in the Gemara. So then there's that actually brings to an Ava. He's on board. He's in the same boat as me. Yeah, we have two different positions, but we're both fighting over the same Torah, with the same emes. We're both kanoim for this, for the emes of Torah, and I appreciate that, and I love him for that. But when it doesn't get to that point, for whatever reason, when something goes wrong, right, that dynamic of each person defending their position, attacking the position of the other, right, that quality of human interaction can bring to Sinas Chinam, where that type of interaction is misused, misapplied, and just I can't stand that other person, that other group, because they're different. Says Rabbi Yaakov Moshe, Omnam, however, Lulei hachet kadum, if it wasn't for the first sin, the sin of Adam Arishai, lo hayat tzarech b'seder kazeh legiluya shel Torah shel Baal Peh. There wouldn't have been a need for this order, for an order like this, for the revelation of Torah shel Baal Peh. It wouldn't have had to come about through this type of back and forth, attacking and war of Torah, milchemto shel Torah, it's what we call it, the war of Torah. Efshar haya sheyitbaru hadvarim belo ha'alamot. It would have been possible. It would have been possible that things would be clarified without any concealments. Not to have to go through. There wouldn't have been this need to begin off as enemies. And from here is the root of the difference between Torah Eretz Yisroel and Torah Chutz La'aretz. Sha'amru, that they said, Noyam, the sweetness, Elu Talmidei Chachamim shebe'Eretz Yisroel. These are the Talmidei Chachamim that are in Eretz Yisroel. Sheman'imim ze lezeh b'halacha. They sweeten for each other in halacha. It's a pleasant discussion. It's a discussion. It's not a fight. It's not a dispute. Yeah, we may have different positions, but we're man'im. We sweeten man'im ze lezeh. Sorry, sometimes we even find that right that a person, and even in the Gemara we've had such a thing, but in Rishonim, you bring a raya to the other person. Oh, you know, Taka, there's a raya in your direction, but still, I would be daicha the raya, and I would still, you know, that can happen. Chayvlim, right? Because the pasuk says noyam chayvlim. So chayvlim, which is a lashon comes from a lashon of chabola, right? Of damaging, of hurting. Elu Talmidei Chachamim shebeBavel. These are the Talmidei Chachamim of Bavel, meaning of Chutz La'aretz, shemechablim zeh lezeh b'halacha, that they injure each other in halacha. Their fights are passionate and ferocious and injuring. They hurt. Ki be'Eretz Yisroel sholet kol kach hapgam shel hachet hakadum. Because in Eretz Yisroel, the blemish of the Chet of Adam Rishon is not sholet so much. It's not as intense, not so difficult. Now, I will explain this a little bit, and then I'll probably ask what everyone's thinking, maybe. But first let me explain what Makatuv, which is really, again, he's just bringing a Gemara here. Right? The idea is that Eretz Yisroel is the Eretz of Yichud. Chazal tell us, Avir Eretz Yisroel machkim. The air of Eretz Yisroel brings chachma. Chachma al pi soid, al pi Kabbalah, al pi soid is unity. Right? We spoke about this in the past. The Zohar, right, which is from Eretz Yisroel, is toch hazeh, to see things. When you see, right, everything comes together. You don't get caught up in this linear, these corners where you're like, how does this work with this? And when you see it, you see all the different, you see things in 3D, so the contradictions fall aside. The differentiation is understood. It's not. It's part of a big picture. It's a symphony. But when you're in Chutz La'aretz is the makam of separation, of Peirut. It's not the land of Yichud. It's not the land of unity, right? In Chutz La'aretz, so there has to be inherently this process of choivlim zeh b'zeh till you get down to the bottom of things. At the end, yes, as vohev basufa, they will be ba'ava, but it doesn't have to go through that whole, ugly process. Now, what might be bothering you certainly bothers me, and I don't really have an answer. Is that it does seem from our experience today that if anything it's the opposite, right? Today, not in yesteryear, but today it does seem like Chutz La'aretz is relatively calm when it comes to machlokes between Rabbanim and between sections or sectors in the Jewish people. It's more chilled out. And in Eretz Yisroel, like, there's a lot of real cutthroat fighting. And like, so what do we do with that? It's Chazal. I don't know. I'm pained by the question. But clearly, I would suggest that, you see, it could be that because we're at the end of days, we're clearly in the Achros Hayomim, in the final stages of world history, as far as Golus and then Geula. So we're very, very close to the Zman of V'hoye B'yayim Hahu Yeh Hashem Echad U'Shmei Echad. I imagine, I believe, we know that this is true. We know that when the Sitra Achra realizes that he's almost gone, that he's about to be eradicated from the world, he goes crazy. Like anyone that's in their last whatever it is, they fight with all the hisgabrus comes out. So it could be that since this is the place where the Geula is about to obviously take place, and this Yichud is, it could be this is the kicking of the Satan. This is the hisgabrus of the leftover zulama of the Chet of Rishon, which doesn't want to be rid of, doesn't want to let go. It could be that therefore, since the place where the events are taking place, where the story matters, is here, so now there's a special hisgabrus of machlekes and of Sinas Chinam, unfortunately, that we are experiencing in our own lives and in current events, literally, mamish, in these very, very days. And perhaps that's somewhat of a hesber for the unfortunate question that current event seems to ask on this, or present as a problem to this Chazal of man'imim, the Talmidei Chacham Eretz Yisroel man'imim zeh lezeh b'halacha. So
I'll say a couple of points, if
yeah,
I may.
Yes. Yeah.
The first is, it says Talmidei Chachamim, so we have to limit our sample to people that are worthy of that mantle of Talmidei Chachamim. And secondly, I wonder whether it's simply about being geographically in Eretz Yisroel. It could also be there's a certain Torah Eretz Yisroel, a mindset of Eretz Yisroel, which is necessary to access that Avir Eretz Yisroel Machkim, which the Chachamim or the Talmud Yerushalmi had. But many people today, at least many sects in Klal Yisrael, would go to say that they're living Golistic in Eretz Yisroel, and perhaps therefore they have not been Zoich.
Okay, so with a lot of that, I agree with a lot of the points. In other words, I do believe that I would say even the overwhelming majority of Talmidei Chacham Eretz Yisrael from all types of Jews, and I'm saying from all types of from real Judaism, okay, are continuing on with Torah's Chutz La'aretz, and even those who claim to be Torah's Eretz Yisrael, without even realizing it, a great many of them are still stuck in the Torah's Chutz La'aretz when it comes down, when push comes to shove. Literally, Roimas Kel Begroin and Becher Fies Bihatam. They'll be speaking about Torah's Eretz Yisrael and Achdus and this and that, and at the same time attacking in a very vicious way of Chayvim Zebazeh, not Man'imim Zebazeh. So I agree with that point. I'm walking backwards a little bit. As per the geographical, I'm never a big fan of the taking Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz into Bechinas. There's such a thing in Sifrei Hasidus, and there are those who, like a lot of people today, I've heard people, like usually they're living in Chutz La'aretz, and they say, oh well, Eretz Yisrael is an idea, it's a dar, this and that, whatever. It's very nice and all, but there's the Torah, and there's the halacha. Who are you kidding? What kind of crazy nonsense is that? Eretz Yisrael is Eretz Yisrael. Yeah, there could be a bechina of Eretz Yisrael. Maybe a person could be zeicha to certainly people can in Chutzlaretz that are anusim in Chutzlaretz, certainly they can be they're forced to live for whatever reason in Chutzlaretz. They can tap into some kind of aspect of Eretz Yisroel. Somebody once asked Rav Mordechai Eliyahu, there's a chazal that if you sleep with shoes on, so it's like death, or it's like toim tamis, or something like tasting death. It's so somebody sent him a question. He was doing shmirah on the border. He was in the army, and he was doing he was guarding on the border, and as such, so even when sleeping, they were expected to keep their shoes on because it could be dangerous. They didn't know what to do because Chazal say that it's like death. So Rav Mordechai Eliyahu, I think it was Rav Mordechai Eliyahu, wrote back to him that it's better to be like dead than dead. Bechinas are bechinas. They're me'ain, they're real. It's real stuff, but it's not the real thing. Not the real thing. Eretz Yisroel is the real thing. So this is the Makom HaYichud. It's not who Chazal talking to. If it doesn't really matter, so okay, so nobody has to be here. You could always be in because you could always tap in, and it's like Talmid Chacham is Bechin of Shabbos, which is true, right? Found it in the Zohar. Talmid Chacham is Bechin of Shabbos. Does anyone think that okay, now he shouldn't put on tefillin, and now he shouldn't do, and he should do, he's not do melachos, and he davens Shabbos tefillas? What kind of these are crazy ideas? It's excuses, If people want to feel good and pat themselves on the back, like, I don't really need. Anyway, that's my little criticism of misapplied Hasidism on this issue, and maybe on other issues also. But now, on the first Nekuda, as far as if people are, who qualifies as Talmidei Chacham and this and that, I prefer not to. I prefer to accept that. Which has really become mainstream opinion, by the way, that the Talmid Chacham as defined in Shulchan Aruch is no longer the definition of Talmid Chacham in our days, and so I prefer to be done. Everyone like Kafschus that there are many real Talmidei Chacham and still fighting, and we find people that were so big. So I just have to say that there's Talmidei Chacham, and therefore I still have the question. That wouldn't suffice. Yeah. Okay. Now, what I want to do is I want to see. Yeah. What's that?
Because it's China, but what's going on there?
Where? Oh, Talmidei Rabbi Akiva. Yeah, by Talmidei Rabbi Akiva, it wasn't sinna that we don't find the lashon of sinna. We find that lo nahagu kavod zeh b'zeh. They didn't have the appropriate cover for each other. It can certainly be, and therefore they were killed out. And the way Rabban Kotler explains it, I think very, very beautifully, is that since Rabbi Akiva and his Talmidim became the link for rejuvenating Klal Yisrael, the whole Mesiras HaTorah went through Rabbi Akiva at this point, because the Gemara says the world was desolate, really desolate of Torah. Rabbi Akiva was Moshe Nefesh to be Maimed 5 Talmidim eventually, right? But basically there was a renaissance going on of Torah where it had basically been virtually wiped out from the masses. So things had to be, the Torah had to be given over in the fullest way. So even this, whatever it was, this small pagam, right? Small because, like the Sfarim say, Lo Nagu Kavod Elazeh was mistama on their darga, on whatever high level that they were. They probably were not the way we think about and we experience Lo Nagu Kavod Elazeh. But okay, regardless, they didn't have enough kavod for each other. But that doesn't necessarily mean the sinna. It doesn't necessarily. Sinna is like, I would say, like another level. Anyway, but one way or the other, I think that today, I think that we have to work on how to be noye kavod zeh b'zeh, even with people that we fiercely disagree with. I don't know if I should talk about this or figure out what time is it. Okay, maybe we will. I wanted to learn some pieces in Rav Kook and then Rabbi Yaakov Moshe another piece. So we'll turn this into, I guess, a series a little bit in the next week or two. I will say there was a video or whatever, I don't know, put out by one of the Datilu Mira Rosh Yeshivas, whatever, this week, end of the week, and in it he calls for not breaking off ties with Haredi family members, etc., because even though people feel so bitter about the fact that they're fighting, that irreligious and the Tilumi people are fighting and losing lives, and families are suffering in the army and protecting also the Haredim, and the Haredim aren't a part of it, so it's making very, very bad feeling. Maybe we should have cut off ties. He says no, can't. We need to keep the connection, because there's never, how are we ever going to get back together? Like we can't just right? Okay. Now, but in this video, he makes a line of he makes a comment that, listen, the Haredim have their chisroinus, and we also have our chisroinus. It's true that our chisroinus don't hurt others, like they're hurting us, but still chisroinus. Now, I said to myself when I heard that, I was like, okay, this is like a part of the problem. First of all, Amita Shaltov, the Haredim look on the Datilumi world as also hurting them. Not because we obviously all believing Jews, right? We all believe that we're all connected, and the averis of other people, right? So if you have a tzibur with there's an enormous amount of people that are really going off the derech and stop keeping Shabbos, and they're doing pritzas and arayas that makes us lose in Mechama and Shmita and whatever, there's a whole long list of things that Haredim sometimes will point to, so they're hurting us, right? The reason we're getting attacked is because of all these ruchniistic things. So it's not. So they'll say, it's not physical. Yeah, but spiritual is a reality. It's not that spiritual. It's a stronger reality, actually. So if we start with the, who's hurting, that's like silly. But let's say it was, this is not the mahalach. This is not the man iman zelazabalacha. At the end of the day, even he was trying to give a good message of keeping shalom. But at the end of the day, in that is a tremendous disparagement of the other camp. And the truth of the matter is that this is a problem, I'm sorry to say, that has been for many years from our side, if I'm like the Haredi side, right, is that basically it's like if you're looking down at the other, right, and you're constantly looking down at the other and disparaging them and speaking of yourselves as like better, that's very, very annoying. When you have that attitude to others, right? If you strip Datilumi Rabbanim from their title Rav, right? Because they're not a Rav, they have Kruma Hashkafas and this and that. It might be true, but when you do that in a public forum, especially, where Datilumi are going to see that, you think that's going to help? Do you think, there's basic noyagim kavod zelezeh, just in order to not be doicha people further and further away from you. And we've had this between Litvish and Hasidish and Sfardim. We had different campuses where you speak of others all the time negatively. I used to go to a minyan by a Sfardi shul, and there was a person would give halachot every day, and every single day there would be a comment about Achenu Ashkenazim, our brothers Ashkenazim, they do like that, and he would trash it, trash the position, make fun of that. I have to say, I've never heard that in a Haredi place, bringing Sfardim to trash. I don't know, but it's coming from somewhere. It's not coming from nothing. It's coming from this elitist feeling that the Ashkenazi world was living with, and maybe still was with, towards the Sfardim, so that Sfardim then had to fight back, and that's Ravad Yosef's big thing. Return the crown. We have to prove Sephardi pride. So that's the way you fight back, is by then, trampling the trampler. And if we keep this up, we're just never going to get out of this pickle, right? I mean, it's just unbelievable. This is just common sense. It's not necessary. I always say this at home. In order to be right, you don't have to take down the other. If you have an important message, it's not the only way. That's Torah's Chutzah. That's been Torah's Chutzah. And that's some of what we'll discuss. We'll see other things on this sort of thing. You don't have to show the correctness and the justification of your ma'alech by destroying the other. It's not necessary. If you really have something of truth, you'll be able to present it, but it takes work to realize how to do that, because we're so used to defining things based on the opposite. That's the Olam HaTmurah that we live in. The reality we live in is that we understand black because it's the opposite of white, and we define white as the opposite of black, as the Marom says at the beginning of Menachm Yisroel. So we've come to that place of definition based on he's wrong, I'm right. So you'll have the Chasidim and Misnagdim. What is a Misnagid? I don't know what a Misnagid is. It just means he's in opposition to the Chasidim. And Chasidus, what is Chasidus? Not a Misnagid. I mean, it's true, it's a positive word, the word Chasidus, but it's become, well, he's not a Misnagid. Like, you try to get to the definition, almost nobody really knows how to define. Because this is part of the Bria Sa'olam. It's part of the way the world has been built. It's part of the Golus, and this is part of what Rabbi Yaakov Moshe is saying. It didn't have to be this way. This is all a byproduct of the Chet, and it's important. And we're going to see more of why it's important. It's an important part of the process. This kind of fragmentation and the separation is important. The definitions are important. But now we're Talmidei Chacham Barbim Shalom Ba'olam. We need to get to that. We need to now bring it all together. We need to bring that light of Shalom, where we're bringing this Esvahev Besufa. We're at the Seif. We want to be at the Seif. Let's bring the Ava part of it. All right, we'll stop for there. I hope this wasn't too political. I'm afraid. I don't know. I put these online sometime. I hope it's not. Shem Yazor. It was Dvarim Yotzim Min Halev. So hopefully it's Nechasim Min Halev. Okay. Shavua.